Police thought the homeless man needed protection. They were wrong, because for nearly 7 months, in the dead of a Chicago winter, a rescued German Shepherd had been protecting him. Not occasionally. Not when danger appeared. Every single night, the dog slept facing the entrance of an abandoned subway tunnel beneath the city's south side. It growled at strangers before they got close. It chased away thieves. It blocked police officers. It even attacked a man carrying nothing more threatening than a flashlight. At first, people assumed it was loyalty. Then they assumed it was trauma. But when investigators finally uncovered what the dog was guarding, they discovered a secret hidden beneath Chicago for more than 20 years. And somehow, a homeless man who claimed to remember almost nothing about his past was standing directly in the middle of it. The winter of 2024 arrived early in Chicago. By November, icy winds were already sweeping through the streets like knives. The city looked different after dark. The skyscrapers still glowed. The trains still rattled overhead. The traffic still flowed endlessly through downtown. But beneath all of that movement, beneath all of that noise, there were places people forgot existed. One of those places sat near an abandoned stretch of subway. Infrastructure that hadn't been used in decades. Most residents didn't even know it was there. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind chain-link fencing, graffiti-covered concrete, and years of neglect. The city had sealed most access points long ago. Most, not all. A narrow gap remained near an old maintenance corridor. That gap led into darkness. And beside that darkness lived a man named Nolan Pierce. Nobody knew exactly how old Nolan was. Some guessed 50, others guessed 65. Homelessness had a way of erasing age. His beard was gray. His coat was patched together from donations. His hands looked permanently stained by years of surviving outdoors. Yet there was something unusual about him. Unlike many people living on the streets, Nolan never asked for money, never begged, never caused problems. He mostly kept to himself. During the day, he collected scrap metal, returned cans, and occasionally helped local shop owners shovel snow. At night, he returned to the tunnel. Always the tunnel. Locals began recognizing him. The workers from nearby warehouses, truck drivers making deliveries, employees from late-night convenience stores. Everyone knew Nolan, and everyone knew the dog. The German Shepherd appeared one freezing evening in late December. Nobody knew where it came from. Animal shelters checked missing reports. Nothing. Veterinarians scanned for a microchip. Nothing. The dog simply appeared. Thin, hungry, covered in old scars, one ear partially torn. Yet despite its condition, the animal carried itself with remarkable confidence. It moved like it had received professional training. People noticed that immediately. The dog ignored everyone. Ignored food. Ignored attention. Ignored attempts at rescue. Instead, it walked directly toward Nolan Pierce and sat beside him. Just sat, as if it had finally found the person it had been searching for. Witnesses later described the moment almost identically. The dog stared at Nolan. Nolan stared at the dog. Neither moved for nearly a minute. Then Nolan quietly offered part of a sandwich. The German Shepherd accepted, and from that day forward they became inseparable. The local community actually liked the arrangement. The dog appeared healthier. Nolan appeared safer. During dangerous winter nights, people worried less knowing the two had each other. The shelter volunteers nicknamed the dog Ranger. The name stuck. Within weeks, Ranger became something of a neighborhood legend. The shepherd escorted Nolan everywhere. If Nolan walked 3 blocks, Ranger walked 3 blocks. If Nolan rested, Ranger rested. If Nolan crossed a street, Ranger crossed beside him. The bond seemed extraordinary, but not mysterious, at least not yet. The strange behavior started in January. One evening, a volunteer named Brooke Hanley arrived with blankets and supplies. She had helped homeless residents throughout Chicago for nearly 10 years. Dogs usually loved her. Ranger didn't. The moment she approached the tunnel entrance, Ranger jumped to his feet. His fur rose instantly. A deep growl echoed through the cold air. Brooke stopped. The dog moved between her and Nolan. Protective behavior wasn't unusual, but this felt different. The shepherd wasn't guarding Nolan. He was guarding the tunnel. Even stranger, once Brooks stepped back from the entrance, Ranger immediately relaxed. No aggression. No growling. Nothing. The behavior repeated itself several days later. Then again and again. Anyone approaching the tunnel after dark triggered the same reaction. Yet during daylight hours, Ranger behaved perfectly. Children petted him. Workers fed him treats. Police officers scratched behind his ears. No problems whatsoever. Only one location triggered the behavior, the tunnel. People began talking. Some believed Nolan was hiding stolen property underground. Others assumed the dog had once lived in the tunnel before meeting Nolan. Neither theory made much sense. Still, curiosity spread. The mystery deepened one snowy February night. A group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned entrance. Mostly for social media content, they approached with flashlights and cameras. According to witnesses, Ranger reacted before they even reached the fence. The dog bolted upright, started barking wildly, then sprinted directly toward the teenagers. The kids panicked and ran. Ranger chased them nearly half a block before returning. When police arrived later, they expected to find an aggressive animal. Instead, they found a calm German shepherd lying beside Nolan. No signs of violence? No signs of instability. Just a dog watching the tunnel, waiting, observing. The responding officer, Garrett Walsh, happened to be a longtime canine handler, and after spending 20 minutes watching Ranger, he noticed something that made him uncomfortable. The shepherd wasn't behaving like a scared dog. He wasn't behaving like a territorial dog. He wasn't even behaving like a protective dog. Ranger looked exactly like a working dog assigned to guard a specific target. A target inside the tunnel. Officer Walsh later admitted that observation kept him awake that night. Because trained dogs don't invent assignments. Someone teaches them, someone trains them, someone gives them a purpose. Which raised a disturbing question. If Ranger was guarding something, what exactly was hidden beneath that abandoned subway tunnel? Nobody had an answer. But 3 nights later, just after midnight, a maintenance worker reported seeing flashlight beams moving deep inside the sealed tunnel. The problem was simple. According to city records, nobody should have been down there at all. And when Officer Walsh arrived to investigate, he discovered Ranger standing at the entrance, silent, motionless, staring into the darkness, as if he already knew someone was inside. And that was the moment the mystery truly began. Officer Garrett Walsh didn't immediately report what he saw that night, at least not officially, because after nearly 15 years working with police dogs, he had learned something important. When an animal behaves in a way that doesn't make sense, people usually assume the dog is the mystery. Most of the time, the dog isn't. The dog is reacting to a mystery humans haven't noticed yet. Standing outside the abandoned tunnel, Walsh watched Ranger for nearly 10 minutes. The German shepherd never barked, never growled, never moved. He simply stared into the darkness, focused, alert, patient, like a soldier waiting for instructions. The flashlight report bothered Walsh. The city had sealed the tunnel decades earlier. Maintenance crews rarely visited. Security cameras didn't cover the area, and the nearest active transit line sat miles away. There should have been nobody down there, yet somebody had apparently been there. The officer eventually entered the maintenance corridor with a flashlight. Ranger followed immediately. That surprised him. Usually the dog blocked people from entering. This time he didn't. The deeper Walsh moved into the corridor, the colder the air became. Old water dripped from concrete ceilings. Rust-covered abandoned electrical boxes. Graffiti stretched across walls like layers of forgotten history. The tunnel felt frozen in time. About 200 feet inside, Walsh found nothing. No footprints, no equipment, no signs of trespassing, nothing. Still, Ranger remained unusually tense. The shepherd repeatedly sniffed the air, then looked deeper into the darkness, then back toward Walsh. Again and again, as if trying to communicate something. Eventually, the officer left, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something important. The next morning, he returned and discovered the first clue: fresh footprints. Not one set, 3. The prints appeared near the rear section of the maintenance corridor. Someone had definitely been there overnight. The strange part? The tracks didn't lead out. Only in. Walsh searched for nearly an hour. The tunnel ended at a collapsed concrete wall. There was nowhere else to go, yet somehow the footprints vanished. That discovery transformed a local curiosity into a genuine mystery. Within days, word spread through the neighborhood. People began visiting the area specifically to see Ranger. Social media videos appeared. Local blogs picked up the story. A rescued German Shepherd protecting a homeless man near a forgotten Chicago tunnel sounded exactly like the kind of strange, urban story people loved sharing online. But increased attention created new problems. More visitors meant more people approaching the tunnel. And Ranger became increasingly protective. One afternoon, a freelance photographer attempted to photograph the entrance. Ranger blocked him. The next week, 2 urban explorers tried entering with cameras. Ranger chased them away. Then came the incident that changed everything. A man named Victor Leland approached Nolan during a freezing evening in March. Nobody knew Victor. Witnesses described him as well-dressed, clean-shaven, expensive coat, mid-50s. Completely out of place in that part of the city, he appeared to recognize Nolan immediately, and for several seconds he simply stood there staring. Something about the interaction seemed odd. Then Victor took a step closer. Ranger exploded into action. The Shepherd launched forward so violently that bystanders thought he had been attacked. Victor stumbled backward. Ranger positioned himself between the 2 men and began barking aggressively. Not warning barks, not defensive barks. The kind of barking police dogs use when confronting a threat. Victor left almost immediately. He didn't argue, didn't complain, didn't even look angry. Instead, witnesses later said he looked terrified, as if seeing the dog had triggered a memory he desperately wished to avoid. When local reporters tracked him down days later, Victor refused interviews, refused questions, refused explanations, and mysteriously checked out of his downtown hotel that same night. Nobody saw him again. The encounter fueled dozens of theories. Internet detectives became obsessed. Some believed Nolan was secretly wealthy. Others thought he had witnessed a crime years earlier. A few even claimed the tunnel contained hidden mob money from Chicago's criminal past. Those theories gained traction because nobody could explain Nolan himself. The more people learned about him, the stranger his story became. According to shelter workers, Nolan rarely discussed his life before arriving in Chicago. When asked about family, he changed the subject. When asked where he grew up, his answers varied. When asked how he became homeless, he often seemed genuinely confused. Not secretive, confused, as if pieces of his own history were missing. One volunteer described it perfectly. Talking to Nolan felt like reading a book with half the pages torn out. That observation eventually reached a journalist named Claire Donnelly. Claire worked for a local investigative news outlet. Unlike most reporters chasing viral stories, she specialized in forgotten people, cold cases, missing persons, corruption, stories hiding beneath the surface. At first, she only intended to write a short article about Ranger. Instead, she found herself fascinated by Nolan. The homeless man carried no identification, no birth certificate, no driver's license. Nothing. Officially, he barely existed, yet fingerprints taken during a previous shelter intake produced a surprising result. Not a criminal record, not a warrant, nothing like that. Instead, they produced fragments of old records from another state. Incomplete records, damaged records, records connected to a man named Nathan Mercer. The problem? The photo attached to those records was nearly 30 years old. And while the resemblance was noticeable, nobody could confirm whether Nathan Mercer and Nolan Pierce were the same person. Claire began investigating anyway. Meanwhile, Ranger's behavior grew stranger. Every night, around exactly 2:17 a.m., the dog performed the same routine. Witnesses documented it repeatedly. He left Nolan's side, walked roughly 60 yards into the tunnel, disappeared for several minutes, then returned, always at 2:17. Always. No exceptions. The consistency disturbed Officer Walsh. Dogs follow routines, but not with that level of precision. It felt deliberate, purposeful, almost like a patrol. One evening, Walsh decided to follow. At exactly 2:17 a.m., Ranger entered the tunnel. Walsh followed from a distance. The dog moved confidently through the darkness, past the maintenance corridor, past the collapsed wall, toward a narrow section of concrete hidden behind decades of debris. Then Ranger stopped. The shepherd began scratching at the ground, not frantically, methodically, like he had done it before. Walsh approached, examined the area, and discovered something unexpected. The concrete floor sounded hollow, very hollow, as though an empty space existed beneath it. The officer immediately contacted city engineers. Within 48 hours, specialists arrived. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed. The results stunned everyone. A hidden chamber existed beneath the tunnel. Large, artificial, completely undocumented. No city maps showed it. No transit records mentioned it. No maintenance reports referenced it. As far as official history was concerned, the chamber shouldn't exist. News of the discovery spread rapidly. Suddenly, the story wasn't about a homeless man and his dog anymore. It was about a secret structure hidden beneath Chicago. Reporters flooded the area. Urban historians joined discussions. Former transit employees were interviewed. Nobody had answers. Then investigators made another disturbing discovery. The hidden chamber appeared accessible through a concealed entrance. An entrance that had been opened recently, very recently, meaning someone had entered the chamber within the last few months. Maybe weeks, maybe days. And that brought everyone back to the same troubling question. Who had been moving through the abandoned tunnel? Because whoever it was, Ranger clearly knew they existed. The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. 3 nights later, surveillance cameras were installed around the tunnel entrance. At 2:11 a.m., one of the cameras captured movement. A figure dressed in dark clothing approaching from the south. The person slipped through the fencing, entered the tunnel, and vanished. Police immediately responded. Officer Walsh arrived first. Ranger was already there, standing rigidly at the entrance, watching, waiting. The team moved inside, flashlights cutting through darkness, weapons drawn. The intruder should have been trapped. There was nowhere to go. Yet, when officers reached the tunnel's deepest section, they found nobody. No suspect. No footprints leaving. Nothing. Just silence. And then Ranger did something that made every officer stop cold. The German shepherd walked directly to a section of wall near the hidden chamber, pressed his nose against the concrete, and began whining. For the first time since anyone had known him. Not barking, not growling. Whining, as though he recognized something on the other side. Something important, something personal. Officer Walsh shined his flashlight across the wall. At first he saw nothing. Then his light caught a small metal object embedded in the concrete. A rusted identification tag, the kind commonly attached to working dogs. Walsh carefully removed it. Years of corrosion covered most of the surface. But one line remained barely readable, and when he read it, a chill ran through his entire body, because the tag contained a training identification number. And according to the database he checked moments later, that number belonged to a German shepherd reported missing 22 years earlier. A police dog, assigned to a case that had never been solved. A case connected to a man who vanished without a trace. A man named Nathan Mercer. The same name Claire Donnelly had just uncovered in Nolan's forgotten records. And suddenly, for the first time, the homeless man, the tunnel, and the dog were no longer separate mysteries. They were part of the same story. A story buried beneath Chicago for more than 2 decades. And nobody yet understood how deep it went. The moment Nathan Mercer's name appeared for the second time, the entire investigation changed. Up until then, most people had viewed the story as a collection of strange coincidences. A homeless man, a rescue dog, an abandoned tunnel, a hidden chamber. Interesting, certainly, but coincidences happen. Now they were looking at something else. Because the odds of a missing police canine from 22 years. Earlier being connected to a forgotten identity discovered. In a homeless man's records were almost impossible, and impossible stories tend to attract attention. Within a week, local news stations were covering the mystery daily. National outlets began calling. Podcasters showed up. True crime bloggers dissected every detail. The abandoned tunnel became one of the most discussed locations in Chicago. Unfortunately, attention brought confusion. And confusion brought theories, lots of theories, most of them wrong. One rumor claimed Nolan Pierce had once been an undercover police officer. Another claimed he had stolen evidence decades ago and hidden it beneath the city. One theory suggested the tunnel chamber contained millions of dollars in missing cash connected to organized crime. That theory spread particularly fast. After all, Chicago had a long history of stories involving corruption, hidden money, and unsolved crimes. People wanted to believe the mystery was dramatic. They wanted treasure, conspiracies, secrets. The truth, however, was proving much harder to find. Claire Donnelly spent nearly every day digging through archives, old newspapers, court records, retired police reports, transit authority documents. Most of the material led nowhere, but eventually she located the original case file connected to Nathan Mercer, or rather what remained of it. The file was incomplete. Several sections were missing. Others had suffered water damage. Still, enough survived to paint a rough picture. 22 years earlier, Nathan Mercer had worked as a private security contractor. Not a police officer, not a detective. A security specialist. According to reports, Mercer disappeared during the winter of 2002. No body was found. No suspects were identified. No witnesses came forward. The investigation stalled quickly. Eventually, the case was classified as unresolved, forgotten, buried beneath newer crimes, newer headlines, newer tragedies. Yet one detail stood out. Nathan Mercer vanished less than 2 miles from the abandoned tunnel. Claire stared at that line for several minutes. 2 miles! Not 2 states away. Not another city. 2 miles! Close enough to matter. Far too close to ignore. Meanwhile, city engineers continued examining the hidden chamber. The space itself was remarkable, constructed entirely from reinforced concrete. Approximately 40 feet long, 20 feet wide, hidden beneath layers of abandoned infrastructure. No official blueprint existed. No permits existed. No documentation existed. It was as though someone had deliberately erased its existence. The engineers eventually located the concealed entrance. It had been hidden behind a false concrete panel. The mechanism was old but functional. Someone had maintained it for years, maybe decades. That discovery created another troubling question. Who maintained a secret underground chamber for 20 years? And why? Police obtained authorization to enter. The first search team included Officer Walsh, engineers, forensic specialists, and structural experts. Claire wasn't allowed inside. Neither were reporters. Everyone waited outside in freezing temperatures as the team disappeared underground. Nearly 3 hours passed. When the officers finally emerged, their expressions told a story before they spoke a single word. They had found something significant, something unexpected, something that instantly shattered several popular theories. Because there was no money, no weapons cache, no criminal headquarters, nothing remotely resembling what internet detectives had imagined. Instead, investigators discovered evidence that someone had been living there recently. A cot, blankets, portable lights, food containers, medical supplies, books, batteries, water filtration equipment. The chamber wasn't a hideout. It was a residence, and whoever occupied it had left only days before police arrived. Perhaps hours. That revelation stunned everyone. Someone had secretly lived beneath Chicago for years, possibly decades, without anyone knowing. The discovery dominated headlines. But an even stranger detail emerged during forensic analysis. Several items recovered from the chamber contained fingerprints. The prints belonged to multiple individuals. Most couldn't be identified. One could. The match came back the following afternoon, and the results shocked investigators. The fingerprints belonged to Nolan Pierce, or more accurately, Nathan Mercer. The identification wasn't tentative anymore. Additional records had finally confirmed it. The homeless man known as Nolan Pierce and the missing man Nathan Mercer were the same person. 22 years earlier, Nathan Mercer vanished. 22 years later, he was sleeping beside an abandoned tunnel under a different name. Alive, but apparently unable to explain how he got there. The revelation raised more questions than answers. Officer Walsh sat with Nathan the next day. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Nathan tried to help. He genuinely did, but his memory resembled shattered glass. Fragments, pieces, disconnected moments. He remembered working security. He remembered Chicago winters. He remembered loud noises underground. Beyond that, everything blurred together. Entire years seemed missing. Large sections of his life simply weren't there. Doctors reviewing the situation suggested long-term trauma, possibly a head injury, possibly something else. Nobody could say for certain. The uncertainty frustrated investigators, because Nathan was now the center of the mystery, and he couldn't explain his own role in it. While authorities struggled with missing memories, Claire uncovered another clue. A retired transit employee named Leonard Briggs contacted her after seeing a news report. Briggs was 81 years old. His memory wasn't perfect, but one detail caught his attention: the hidden chamber. He believed he had heard rumors about it decades earlier. Not official rumors, worker rumors. Stories shared during overnight maintenance shifts. According to Briggs, some employees occasionally mentioned unexplained construction beneath abandoned sections of the subway system. Most dismissed the stories, urban legends. Nothing more. Still, Briggs remembered one name associated with those whispers: Elias Voss. The name meant nothing to Claire initially. Then she researched it, and everything changed. Elias Voss had been a civil engineer. Highly respected. Brilliant. He worked on several major infrastructure projects throughout Illinois during the 1980s and 1990s. Then suddenly he vanished from public records. No death certificate, no retirement announcement, nothing. His trail simply ended. Claire dug deeper. The deeper she looked, the stranger things became. Several construction companies connected to Voss had dissolved unexpectedly. Project records disappeared. Financial records vanished. Former employees refused interviews. It felt less like research and more like stepping into a maze. Yet one fact emerged clearly. Elias Voss possessed the expertise necessary to design a hidden underground chamber. Theoretically, he could have built it. The question was why. As journalists chased Voss, investigators focused on Ranger, because the dog continued exhibiting behavior nobody could explain, particularly around Nathan. One evening, a veterinarian specializing in working dogs observed the pair. Her findings surprised everyone. Ranger wasn't merely attached to Nathan. He was monitoring him, watching him constantly, checking his movements, remaining within visual range whenever possible. The behavior resembled long-term assignment bonding, a pattern common among military and police working dogs. The veterinarian estimated that Ranger had likely received professional training at some point. Extensive training. Years of it. The problem? Ranger was only about 5 years old. That timeline made no sense. The dog was far too young to have any connection to events 22 years earlier. Yet somehow he possessed knowledge linked to those events. Another contradiction. Another puzzle. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. Forensic technicians analyzing recovered chamber items discovered a damaged notebook hidden inside a ventilation compartment. Most pages were ruined. Water damage had erased large sections, but several entries survived. The handwriting belonged to an unidentified author. The dates stretched across nearly 17 years. Investigators immediately began reviewing every surviving page. The entries appeared mundane at first. Maintenance notes, supply lists, observations. Then they reached the final surviving pages, and suddenly everything became terrifying. One passage mentioned Nathan Mercer by name. Another referenced memory loss. Another referenced keeping him hidden until it's safe. The final readable entry was even worse. It contained only one complete sentence, a sentence that sent shockwaves through the investigation. If anything happens to me, the truth remains beneath the third wall. Nobody knew what the third wall meant. Nobody knew who wrote it. Nobody knew what truth was being referenced. But everyone understood one thing. The mystery wasn't over. The hidden chamber wasn't the secret. It was protecting the secret. Engineers immediately began mapping every wall inside the underground structure. Hours later, they located an anomaly. A section of reinforced concrete that didn't match the surrounding construction. The dimensions were different. The materials were different. The age was different. It appeared to have been added later. Much later, investigators prepared excavation equipment. Reporters gathered outside. Police secured the entire area. Claire stood behind the barricades, watching crews descend underground. Officer Walsh accompanied the team. So did forensic specialists. And strangely enough, Ranger became increasingly agitated as preparations began. The dog paced, whined, scratched at the ground. Something about the wall clearly affected him. Nobody understood why. Hours passed, then evening arrived. Finally, just after sunset, a call came from inside the tunnel. The wall had been opened, and behind it, investigators had discovered a second hidden room. A room no blueprint had ever documented. A room nobody knew existed. A room containing dozens of carefully preserved boxes, and in the center of the floor, a single photograph. A photograph showing a much younger Nathan Mercer standing beside an elderly man. The elderly man was identified within minutes. Elias Voss, the engineer who had vanished decades earlier. But that wasn't what shocked investigators. What shocked them was what appeared in the background of the photo, because behind both men stood a German shepherd, a working dog, wearing an identification tag, and the number on that tag matched the one Officer Walsh had recovered from the tunnel wall. The tag from the police dog reported missing 22 years ago, meaning one impossible fact suddenly became unavoidable. Nathan Mercer had known the missing dog. Elias Voss had known the missing dog, and whatever secret connected them had been deliberately hidden underground for more than 2 decades. But the contents of those boxes would prove something even more disturbing. Something nobody was prepared for, because when investigators opened the first container, they discovered evidence suggesting that Nathan Mercer's disappearance had never been a missing person case at all. It had been something far more dangerous. By midnight, nearly everyone involved in the investigation understood that they were no longer dealing with a local curiosity. The abandoned tunnel, the hidden chamber, Nathan Mercer, Elias Voss, the missing police dog, all of it was connected. The only question was how. Inside the second hidden room, investigators carefully opened the preserved boxes one by one. Most expected evidence tied to an old crime. Maybe financial records. Maybe photographs. Maybe stolen property. What they found instead was something nobody had predicted. Documents. Thousands of pages of documents. Engineering reports. Inspection logs. Internal correspondence, blueprints, photographs, videotapes, audio recordings, entire filing systems, meticulously organized, protected from moisture, protected from time, protected as if someone had spent decades making sure they survived. Officer Walsh watched forensic specialists work through the first several boxes. At first, the material seemed boring, technical, complicated, the kind of paperwork that rarely attracted public attention. Then one engineer reviewing the files suddenly froze. A silence settled over the room. Everyone looked toward him. The engineer slowly lifted a stack of papers. His face had gone pale. "What is it?" someone asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed the documents to another specialist. That specialist's expression changed too. Within minutes, investigators realized they had stumbled onto something enormous. The files appeared to document structural defects hidden inside several major infrastructure projects completed during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Bridges, utility systems, transit structures, underground support networks. According to the records, certain contractors had knowingly concealed serious construction flaws. Flaws that could have endangered thousands of people. Flaws worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The room suddenly felt smaller, much smaller, because if the documents were authentic, someone had spent years covering up one of the largest engineering scandals in Illinois history, and somebody else had spent years preserving proof of it. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the evidence became. Photographs showed cracked support systems hidden behind cosmetic repairs. Audio recordings captured meetings between contractors and inspectors. Financial records revealed suspicious payments. Entire chains of corruption emerged from the boxes, not rumors. Evidence. Detailed evidence. Evidence powerful enough to destroy careers, launch prosecutions, rewrite decades of public history. The mystery had become bigger than anyone imagined. Much bigger. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why had Nathan Mercer disappeared? And what role had Elias Voss played in all of this? The answer emerged from a collection of cassette recordings, recovered near the back of the room. The tapes required restoration. Several hours later, technicians managed to recover portions of the audio. The voice belonged to Elias Voss. Older, tired, afraid, yet remarkably clear. In recording after recording, Voss described discovering widespread corruption during infrastructure inspections. At first, he attempted to report it through official channels. Nothing happened. Then he gathered evidence. People ignored him. Then he gathered more evidence. Still nothing. Eventually, according to Voss, individuals connected to the corruption began noticing his efforts. The recordings described threats, surveillance, intimidation. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. The kind of quiet pressure that destroys lives without attracting headlines. Then one recording changed everything. In it, Voss described meeting a private security specialist named Nathan Mercer, a man he trusted, a man hired to help protect evidence, a man willing to risk everything. Investigators listened in complete silence, because suddenly the story was starting to make sense. Nathan Mercer hadn't stumbled into the mystery. He had chosen it. Years earlier, he had become part of it. Another recording revealed even more. According to Voss, the evidence became so dangerous that they created the underground archive, the hidden chambers, the secret storage rooms, the preserved records, everything. The goal wasn't exposing corruption immediately. The goal was survival. Keeping proof alive long enough for the truth to eventually emerge. At the time, it had seemed like their only option. Then the recordings abruptly stopped. No explanation, no ending, just silence. Investigators still didn't know what happened afterward, but they were getting closer. Much closer. Meanwhile, Nathan sat inside a temporary shelter arranged by city officials. Doctors continued evaluating him. Memory specialists reviewed his case. The old records, the recovered evidence, the audio recordings. Every new discovery seemed to trigger small flashes of recognition. Not complete memories, fragments, tiny pieces. A smell, a sound, a face. One afternoon, Claire visited him, not as a reporter, as a person. For weeks, she had watched this mystery consume his life. Now she wanted answers, too. Nathan sat quietly staring through a window when she arrived. Snow drifted across the city outside. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Nathan suddenly said something that made Claire's heart race. "I remember the dog." Claire immediately turned toward him. "The old police dog?" Nathan nodded slowly. "I remember him." The memory appeared fragile, like a dream fading after waking. Yet pieces continued emerging. A German shepherd, long nights underground, boxes, documents, Elias Voss. Fear, lots of fear. Claire encouraged him to continue. Nathan closed his eyes. More fragments surfaced. The old dog wasn't his. The dog belonged to someone else, someone helping protect the archive, someone trusted, someone important. Then Nathan remembered something else, something nobody had considered. The dog had puppies, several puppies. One of them had remained with Elias Voss. The room went silent. Claire immediately understood the implication. Not the original dog. A bloodline. Generations. The idea sounded unbelievable, yet suddenly Ranger's connection made sense. At least partially. A descendant. A line of working dogs bred and trained by the same caretaker, passed from generation to generation. Guardians assigned to the archive. Guardians assigned to protect whoever remained responsible for it. The revelation shocked investigators, but it didn't explain everything, particularly one critical question. What happened to Elias Voss? The answer arrived 3 days later, inside the final unopened box, the smallest box in the room. Forensic specialists almost overlooked it. Fortunately, they didn't. Inside sat a collection of letters, personal letters, written by Voss, addressed to nobody. Never mailed, more like a journal. The final entries transformed the investigation. According to Voss, corruption wasn't his greatest fear. Time was. People die. Evidence disappears. Witnesses forget. Public attention moves elsewhere. He worried the truth would vanish before anyone listened. Then he described Nathan, a severe injury, an accident, a collapse inside an underground section during a storm. Nathan survived. Barely. But the injury affected his memory. The damage worsened over time. Voss feared Nathan would eventually forget everything, including why he was there, including who he was. The letters became increasingly emotional. Voss clearly cared about him, viewed him almost like family. Then came the final entry, the last words Voss ever left behind. Investigators read them repeatedly, because they contained the answer to the entire mystery. If I am gone before this ends, the dogs will stay with him. The room fell silent. If Nathan forgets, they won't. Again, silence. He may lose his memories. Another line. They will remember their duty. Then the final sentence. The day one of them brings the world back to him, the truth can finally come home. No one spoke, because suddenly everything fit. The generations of dogs, the protection, the tunnel, Nathan, the archive, the years. Ranger had never been protecting a place. Not primarily. He had been protecting Nathan, exactly as he had been trained to do, exactly as generations before him had done. But the story still wasn't finished, because investigators had uncovered corruption, evidence, history, motives. Yet one enormous mystery remained. Where was Elias Voss? No death certificate existed. No grave existed. No official record explained his disappearance. The man who created the archive had simply vanished. And then, during a routine examination of the hidden rooms, engineers discovered one final concealed compartment, smaller than the others, sealed behind reinforced steel, deliberately hidden. Inside, they expected more documents, more evidence, more records. Instead, they found something that stopped everyone cold. A simple wooden box, nothing else, just one box. Officer Walsh opened it personally. Inside lay a pocket watch, several photographs, and a sealed envelope. The envelope contained a handwritten note. The signature at the bottom belonged to Elias Voss. But it was the date that shocked everyone, because the note wasn't 20 years old. It wasn't 10 years old. It had been written only 6 years earlier, meaning Elias Voss had been alive recently, very recently. And according to the first line of the letter, he knew exactly where Nathan was. He knew exactly where the archive was. And he believed someone was still searching for both. The rest of the letter would reveal the final piece of the mystery. But before investigators could finish reading it, they discovered something even more alarming. The final page had been torn out, deliberately removed. And whoever removed it had likely done so within the last few months, meaning somebody besides police had reached the hidden room before them. Somebody who knew about the archive. Somebody who knew about Elias Voss. Somebody who may have been watching the tunnel all along, and for the first time since the investigation began, Officer Walsh realized the mystery wasn't buried entirely in the past. Part of it was still alive. And somewhere in Chicago, a person who knew the missing truth was still out there. For months, people had believed they were investigating a mystery from the past. An abandoned tunnel, a forgotten homeless man, a rescued German shepherd with unusual behavior, a hidden archive buried beneath Chicago. Now investigators understood something unsettling. The past wasn't finished. Someone had entered the secret room recently. Someone had removed the final page of Elias Voss's letter. Someone knew the truth, and that person was still out there. The discovery launched the largest phase of the investigation, not because authorities expected danger, but because they finally had a clear objective. Find whoever accessed the archive before police. Officer Garrett Walsh led much of the effort. Surveillance footage from nearby streets was reviewed. Transit records were examined. Warehouse security cameras were checked. Dozens of leads emerged. Most collapsed quickly. Wrong dates, wrong people, wrong locations. Yet one clue survived. A grainy image from a private loading dock camera captured. A man walking near the tunnel 3 weeks before the hidden chamber was discovered. The image quality was terrible. The face was partially obscured, but investigators noticed something important. The man carried a distinctive black case, the same style of case later visible in one of the old photographs recovered from Elias Voss's archive. For the first time, the recent visitor wasn't completely invisible. Claire Donnelly became obsessed with finding him. The story had transformed her life. What started as a local feature about a dog had evolved into the most important investigation of her career. She spent days comparing photographs, interviewing retired engineers, tracking old business records, searching for anyone connected to Elias Voss, and she found something. A name, not a suspect, not a criminal, a former apprentice, a young engineer who had worked under Voss during the late 1990s. His name was Connor Hale. At first, Connor seemed irrelevant. His career history appeared normal. No criminal record, no scandals, no obvious connection to the archive. But Claire noticed a detail others had missed. 6 years earlier, Connor had quietly purchased an industrial storage facility on Chicago's South Side. The building sat less than a mile from the abandoned tunnel, close enough to matter. Again, far too close to ignore. Authorities obtained permission to speak with him. The meeting happened on a cold March afternoon. To everyone's surprise, Connor cooperated immediately. He didn't deny knowing Elias Voss. He didn't deny knowing about the archive, and when investigators showed him the photograph from the loading dock camera, he simply nodded. "That's me." The room fell silent. Months of mystery suddenly pointed toward one man. Yet Connor didn't look nervous, didn't look defensive. If anything, he looked relieved, like someone carrying a burden for years. A burden he was finally allowed to put down. His explanation stunned everyone. According to Connor, Elias Voss had contacted him 6 years earlier. The engineer was elderly by then, sick, weak, aware that his time was running out. Voss feared the archive would eventually be discovered without proper context. He feared people would misinterpret the evidence. Worse, he feared Nathan Mercer would never recover enough memory to explain his role. So Voss created a contingency plan. Connor became its caretaker, not the archive itself, just the information necessary to understand it. He occasionally checked the hidden rooms, maintained environmental equipment, ensured the evidence remained protected. Nothing more, nothing less. When Voss died, Connor inherited the responsibility. The revelation answered several lingering questions, but one mystery remained. The missing page, the final page of the letter. Connor slowly reached into a folder, then placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. The missing page. He had removed it, deliberately. Officer Walsh immediately asked why. Connor's answer changed everything. Because the page wasn't evidence, it was a message. A private message addressed directly to Nathan Mercer. Voss never intended it for investigators, never intended it for reporters, never intended it for the public, only Nathan. For years, Connor had honored that request, but circumstances had changed. The truth was finally emerging. The archive had been discovered. The corruption evidence was secure. The mystery was ending. It was time for Nathan to receive the message. The following day, a small group gathered inside a conference room arranged by city officials. Officer Walsh attended. Claire attended. Several investigators attended. Nathan sat quietly at the center of the room. Ranger rested beside his chair. Connor unfolded the letter, then began reading. The words were simple. No dramatic confessions, no shocking revelations, no hidden treasure, just honesty. Elias Voss wrote about friendship, trust, sacrifice, responsibility. He described Nathan as the bravest man he had ever known. A man who repeatedly risked his life protecting evidence that could expose wrongdoing. A man who never accepted recognition, never sought rewards, never demanded credit. Then came the section that brought silence to the room. Voss described the accident, the collapse, Nathan's injuries, the memory loss, the years of confusion that followed. According to Voss, Nathan repeatedly insisted he didn't care about recovering his reputation. He only cared about ensuring the truth survived, even if he didn't, even if nobody remembered him. Then came the final paragraph. The paragraph Voss never wanted strangers reading. Nathan, if this reaches you, then we succeeded. Everyone listened. The evidence survived. Another line. The truth survived. Nathan stared quietly at the floor. The dogs did their job? At those words, Ranger lifted his head, almost as if he understood. Then came the final sentence, the sentence that brought tears to more than one person in the room. And if you've forgotten who you were, remember this instead. You were never the man who lost everything. You were the man who protected everyone else. The room remained silent long after Connor finished reading. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody needed to. Because after months of mystery, the answer wasn't hidden money, wasn't organized crime, wasn't a conspiracy. It was something far more human. A group of ordinary people had chosen to protect the truth. One engineer, one security specialist, several loyal dogs, and an archive hidden beneath a city. The investigation eventually produced real consequences. Independent reviews confirmed many of the archived records. Several long-forgotten infrastructure projects underwent renewed inspections. Historical reports were corrected. Public records were updated. Questions that had lingered for decades finally received answers. The process took time. Years in some cases, but the evidence mattered, because truth matters. Even when it arrives late, Nathan's life changed too. Not overnight, not magically. Recovery rarely works that way, but for the first time in decades, he no longer carried the burden of being an unidentified man wandering through fragments of memory. He knew who he was. He knew what had happened. Most importantly, he knew that his life had meant something. The city helped him obtain housing. Former colleagues came forward. Community organizations assisted with medical care. People who had once walked past him without a second glance suddenly understood his story. Many wanted to help, some simply wanted to shake his hand. Nathan accepted neither attention nor praise comfortably. He remained the same quiet man he had always been. Only now he smiled more often. The greatest transformation belonged to Ranger. For months, the German Shepherd had lived as if carrying an invisible responsibility, watching, guarding, waiting. Then something changed. Almost immediately after the mystery was solved, people noticed it. The tension disappeared. The constant vigilance softened. Ranger still stayed near Nathan, still followed him everywhere, still slept beside him, but the anxious watchfulness faded. The assignment was over. The duty had been fulfilled. The old promise had finally been kept. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after the tunnel investigation began, Claire visited a small city park near Lake Michigan. She had arranged a final interview with Nathan. The story that once dominated national headlines had largely faded from public attention, as stories always do. New mysteries replaced old ones. New headlines replaced old headlines. Yet some stories leave permanent marks. This was one of them. Nathan sat on a bench overlooking the water. Ranger rested beside him. The German Shepherd looked healthy now, strong, content. Children played nearby. Boats moved across the lake. The city skyline stretched across the horizon. For a long time, Claire simply watched. Then she asked the question she had wanted to ask for months. What do you think Ranger was protecting all those years? Nathan smiled. Not a sad smile, not a mysterious smile, a peaceful one. He reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. Then he looked across the water. I think everyone got it backward. Claire waited. Nathan glanced toward Ranger. The dog wasn't protecting a secret. The shepherd leaned against his leg. He was protecting a promise. Years later, people still tell the story. Some remember the hidden tunnel. Some remember the underground archive. Some remember the corruption investigation. But most remember the German Shepherd, the rescue dog that refused to leave a homeless man's side. The dog that seemed to know something nobody else understood. And maybe that's because the mystery was never really about what was buried beneath Chicago. It was about loyalty, the kind that survives decades, the kind that survives lost memories, the kind that asks for nothing in return. Because long before investigators uncovered the truth, long before reporters found answers, and long before Nathan Mercer remembered his own name, one faithful dog had already known exactly what mattered. Not the evidence, not the secrets, not the history, just the man he had been entrusted to protect. And sometimes, the most extraordinary mysteries don't end when the truth is discovered. Sometimes they end when a promise is finally kept.